Hello, this is Brad Tallis with Next Gen Solutions, and welcome to this week's Fusion Friday. This week's video is all about as-built joints. So let's take a look at this powerful command. So as-built joints are underneath the assemble menu. You can see the regular joint command, and then we have as-built joints. And as-built joints are used when you already have parts that are assembled together, but you want to see how those joint relationships will work together. So here's a really cool way to kind of see how this works. I'm going to insert in a McMaster car component, and let's just look for a toggle clamp. In fact, I'm just going to grab the very first toggle clamp out of the list here. I'll scroll down and let's just grab this one. I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees and let's just say OK. And you can kind of see this toggle clamp came in. Now, if I want to use joints or as-built joints, they have to be components. And you'll notice that this is like all one component, and underneath that are a bunch of bodies. So I want to right-click on the bodies and say create components from bodies, and now these are all individual components. And you'll notice that they're assembled. They're in the correct location, but I want to simulate like how would these things work. And you'll notice there is no linkages. There's nothing connected together. And that's where the as-built joint really comes into play. So the first thing we need to do is we need to, lock down one of these parts. So I'm going to go ahead and select this bracket right here, and we can see that that's component 3. So I'm going to right click on it and say pin. We want to kind of pin that in place. In fact, I could also do that with this other one. I'll go ahead and pin that in place also. And that means these can't move. Now when I try and click and drag on them, they can't move, but the other components can. So the next thing is to do the as-built joint. Now, what's nice about this is you can see all the different types of motions that you can do, like rigid, revolute, slider, etc. And I'm going to focus on the revolute joints. So I'm going to set the default here to be revolute. And then it's just asking for components. So for example, I could select this arm and this component here, and then it's asking for a snap. What's it going to revolve around? Well, it's going to revolve around this pin. So all I have to do is select either of these, circular edges. So for example, like that right there, and you can see it kind of previews what that looks like. And I'll say OK. I didn't have to move one component from one location to another, using those joint origins and making sure the joint origins are facing the correct direction like you typically do with the joint command. So let's do that again. I'll say as-built joint. I'm going to say this arm and this arm revolve around, for example, like that edge there. I'll say OK. This arm and this bracket revolve around like that edge there. And I'm going to go ahead and just grab this arm now, and you can kind of see how some of this stuff is starting to interact with each other. Now, obviously, there's some issues we're going to resolve here in a little bit, but you can kind of start to see what's going on, especially with like this arm around this bracket right here. So we're just kind of building the intelligence into here. So I'm going to keep going. I'll say as-built joint. We'll say this point and this guy here revolves around that. And then these are two separate arms. So I'll go ahead and do the same thing. I'll say as-built joint. In fact, actually, you know what? Instead of doing an as-built joint, I'll just do a rigid group and say that those two have to move together because they're basically bolted together. So let's go ahead and grab this now. And sure enough, we can see how as I grab this handle, how those linkages now work together. Now, I do see a couple issues. First of all, this like rubber grip doesn't move with the handle. And then we also see a couple pins need to move with the handle. And then we have this almost like a sub-assembly over here that needs to move with it also. So that's where this rigid group really comes into play. So I'm going to say rigid group, and I want this rubber handle to be rigid and grouped to the metal handle there. I'm just going to say okay. And now when I move that metal handle, the rubber grip has to move with it. And then I'll do the same thing with these pins. I'll say rigid group, and I want that pin to move with the handle. And I also want this pin to move with the handle. So now when I move that handle, we can see that those pins move with it. And now we're getting a much better simulation of what's going on when I move that handle. And the as-built joints were very quick to create, and we can simulate how this whole thing works. Much quicker than having to assemble with the joint command, move all the parts kind of out of location, and then use the joint command to put them all back into location. So I really love the as-built joint. So how would I take care of this over here? Well, these are all individual components. So they you almost can kind of think of them as a sub-assembly. So I'm going to say rigid group. And let's just connect all of these together into a group. And now you can kind of see they're all one group. And we can use an as-built joint. And I'm going to change it from revolute to slider. And I'm going to say I want this washer to slide along this metal arm right here. And so all I have to do is select this line right here and maybe grab that midpoint, and you can kind of see how the preview is showing that washer sliding back and forth. I'll say okay. And now you can kind of see how that whole assembly can slide back and forth. So anyways, you could see the benefit of using as-built joints for components that are already assembled, and you don't have to assemble them one piece at a time using the regular joint command. Hopefully you found this video useful. If you did, all I ask is that you give the video a thumbs up and share or repost the video with others in your network. This will help spread the knowledge of Fusion out to the community. If you have any comments or ideas for future topics, please reach out to me at bradtallis@nextgensolutions.com, and I look forward to seeing you on the next Fusion Friday.